Welcome to this episode of the Leading in Dentistry podcast. I'm Dr. Wes Eggett. After spending the last 20 years in a variety of leadership positions, and as a student of leadership myself, I started Leading in Dentistry to share what I found and to continue learning with you. If anything from this episode stands out, check out the show notes, our online courses, or one-on-one coaching on leadingindentistry.com. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Leading in Dentistry podcast. I'm Dr. Wes Eggett. For those of you new to the podcast, I am a practicing associate dentist just outside of Denver, Colorado, and I started Leading in Dentistry to help develop the leadership skills of each team member in the dental office, not just the business owner. And I started this podcast specifically while I'm not an owner of any dental practice, as I really want to get across the message that you don't need to wait until you're in charge to be a leader. Now, this episode is being released about 2 days before Thanksgiving 2024, and it's got me thinking about one of my favorite Thanksgiving stories, which honestly is more of a leadership story. And that'll make sense in a second. So in this story, there is a woman and she's hosting Thanksgiving and she's having her whole family over and the mother and the grandmother and all the aunts and uncles and all that. And she is taking the turkey out of the oven the same time that everybody's getting there. And the grandmother sees how she has prepared the turkey and the grandmother comments, "Wow, I cannot believe that you're still doing that." And the woman says, "Doing what?" And she said, "You cut the legs off of the turkey. And you cut the legs off before you cooked it." And the lady says, "Well, that's how I was taught how to do it." And then her mother says, "Well, that's how you taught me how to do it." And the grandmother says, "The only reason we ever cut the legs off the turkey was because my oven was too small and I couldn't fit the turkey into the oven without cutting off the legs." And so what's funny is that this grandmother had a certain way of doing things and she had a reason behind doing what she was doing. But as people saw what she was doing, then they copied it without understanding why she was doing what she was doing. Why was she cutting the legs off the turkey? And no one ever stopped to question that over multiple generations. And what's interesting, in dentistry, we do the same thing. And in leadership, we do the same thing. Oftentimes, our team members do things just because that's the way it's always been done. And when you hear that phrase, "that's the way we've always done it," that is a trigger that it's time to reassess why you're doing what you are doing. Now, it's no secret on the podcast that we love Simon Sinek. Simon Sinek has so many great teachings, and the thing that really put him on the map was a TED Talk about starting with why. If you start with why you are doing something, it makes the implementation of it so much easier. And the problem in dentistry, the problem in getting people engaged, is that so often we are so process-driven that we don't stop to ask why we're doing what we're doing. And when we're so process-driven, we create an environment where people come to work and put their heads down and just execute on a task. And that's not really what we want out of people. That puts them in an environment where they're just doing the thing, rote tasks. And instead, we want to create an environment where people are engaged. This podcast is focused entirely around the idea of it's not just the business owner who can be a leader. It's anyone who can be a leader. But in order to be a leader, you have to be able to take ownership over a task. And to take ownership over it, you have to understand what it is. You have to understand why you're doing what you're doing. And then you can start to find new ways, creative ways to do it in a way that's entirely your own, where you have some autonomy over what it is that you're doing. So today we're going to talk about a couple of different things. Why that's the way we've always done it is a problem. We're going to talk about how it impacts teams, how it impacts leaders, and how to challenge the status quo appropriately. So when you are saying, that's the way we've always done it, think about why that's a problem. First, it leads to stagnation. If you're doing something the same way all the time, there's no novelty, and that can lead to things not only being boring, but can also lead to doing things the wrong way, doing things in a way that's outdated. It'd be like still having paper charts or still having to develop the film on the x-rays. If that's the way you've always done it, I understand that's something that you feel comfortable with, but like the phrase says, there's no comfort in the growing zone and no growing in the comfort zone. In order to grow, you have to get out of your comfort zone and try something that's just a little bit different. Also, when you just resort to that's the way we've always done it, then it creates missed opportunities. There could be better ways of doing things, making things more productive, more efficient, and make your life easier. But if you're just doing things the way you've always done them because you're comfortable there, you have to recognize that sometimes you're comfortable doing the most uncomfortable thing. Sometimes there's a more comfortable way of doing things. And then finally, it makes people lose sight of the purpose behind the process. So the same way in that story that the woman preparing and hosting that Thanksgiving meal, she didn't understand why she was doing what she was doing. She was just doing it. And when you lose that purpose, then you lose the drive in dentistry. You lose the drive on a team because you're just doing the thing because that's the way it's been done. And that's not a way to create an engaging environment. So how does this impact leaders? How does this impact different teams? So for team members, when you are doing things just the way they've always been done, it can lead to frustration, it can lead to disengagement, and it can also lead to a fear of speaking up with new ideas. For a team member who is very, very comfortable doing things just the way they've always been done, that's another trigger for leaders or for team members to ask yourself, is this person the type of person who's going to go above and beyond and try something new? Now, I will say that people who do things the way they've always been done, they're super valuable on a team as well because they show an understanding of consistency. They show an understanding of process, just not the why behind the process. If you read the book Radical Candor by Kim Scott, she talks about the difference between rock stars and superstars. Now, oftentimes with rock stars, we say, oh, that person's so solid, that person's a rock star because they work so hard all the time. That's not the way she's using it. The way she uses it is these people are solid as a rock. They will show up every time, do things consistently over and over and over again. That's very valuable on a team. But it's not the type of person who's in a growth mindset, a person who's always constantly striving for the next thing. That's what she describes as superstars. So on a team, you do need these rock stars, these people that are consistent. But the difficult thing is you don't want them to be stagnant. You also want them to be able to grow. The rock stars on your team are the people that are consistently going to be reliable, but they may not be the person who comes up with a new system. They need it to be challenged for them, but then they will execute on the things that you ask of them. I hope that makes sense there. Now, for leaders, if we fall back on, this is the way that things have always been done, it also erodes trust. It creates blind spots, and it leaves the team unprepared for when changes do come up. If you are a leader who does things the same way every single time, it's a valuable skill. You want to be able to be consistent. That does create trust for your team. But if you're doing things in a way that is outdated, if you're doing things in a way that's just been handed down to you, then your team doesn't trust that you have mastery over your own position. One of the things that builds trust faster than anything else is competence. We learned about that with the 3 C's from Patrick Sweeney. One of those 3 C's of trust is competence. People trust the leaders over them who are competent. And if you are doing things just the way they've always been done, it shows a lack of growth on your part. And in your team's eyes, that will create a lack of trust because they don't believe that you are consistently striving for the next big thing. They don't think that you're up to date or that your processes are modern, contemporary ways of doing things. So for leaders, it's also very valuable to question, why am I doing what I'm doing? And is the way that I'm doing this thing creating an engaging environment for my team where they can trust that I know what I'm doing? Just a quick interruption here. If you are gaining some value from this podcast, if you enjoy it in any way, if you think someone else could benefit from it, then go ahead and share this with a friend, share it with your team, share it with a colleague. It really helps support the show. Now let's get back to it. And then finally, I wanted to talk about how to challenge the status quo, okay? One of the earlier podcast episodes, we talked about the Chick-fil-A milkshake. Now, the Chick-fil-A milkshake is something that lots of people enjoy. It's one of the highest selling items on the Chick-fil-A menu, but people are surprised to find out that that actually did not come from Chick-fil-A itself. That was an individual manager of a Chick-fil-A who took it upon himself to try something new. He said, we already have the stuff to make the ice cream. We have pretty much everything we need to make a milkshake. And people were asking him for it in the South where he was, where it was warm and it was summertime. And he said, I'm just going to try it. And he tried something a little bit new, a little bit different. And then he tested it, and then he told his leaders about it, and he said, this is what I'm trying, and they gave him the permission to do a little pilot program. And he tried to meet the goals of Chick-fil-A. He wanted to make sure that he could make it as efficiently as possible. When one of his leaders came down and they were trying to check out what he was doing, he said, I know that this is important to you, that things are done quickly and efficiently. And if I can make a milkshake in the time that it takes you to make 2 Diet Cokes, will you let this program continue? And so he raced his regional manager, or whoever the position was, in making 2 Diet Cokes. He made a milkshake, and he showed them that not only was he meeting the efficiency goal, but he was also meeting one of the goals of the people that they were asking for this milkshake. Now, what's interesting about this story, when he talks about making the Chick-fil-A milkshake, he says, I wanted to do something that was similar to what Chick-fil-A was already offering. He said, if this was a pizza, I wouldn't have done it. So when he was questioning the way that things had been done, he was questioning that Chick-fil-A hadn't made a milkshake yet. He didn't say, why haven't they made a pizza? He wanted to do something that was close enough to what they were already doing. They already had all the equipment. They were already offering ice cream. It was very adjacent to the tasks they were already performing. It wasn't so out of left field. So sometimes when you're questioning how things have been done, it's appropriate to come up with these Chick-fil-A pizza ideas. But not always. Oftentimes, if you're trying to just make a difference in your own position and take ownership over your responsibilities, coming up with things that are just adjacent to the way things are already being done, that is the most effective way to get buy-in from other people on your idea. If your Chick-fil-A pizza idea is off in the distance and you want to get there eventually, get there with incremental steps of challenging the status quo. Don't flip everything over on its head at once, but give yourself little steps in order to get there. Another thing to remember is that you don't want to be changing things just for change's sake. If you're changing things just for change's sake, then you are doing just another version of following a tradition. And you can say that's what we've always done, is just change things just to change them. Oftentimes, members of a team will feel like the leaders are changing things just to change them because so many changes are coming down the pipeline. And that's not what you want either. You want to create an environment where people can feel consistency, where they can feel predictability, where they can feel comfort at work, confidence that you know what you're doing, and that you are sticking to the task that you've set for yourself. But you also do want to create an environment where that conversation is open, where you understand as a team that we're always looking for another way of doing things. If you have ideas, the team leaders or the owners of the practice should create an environment where people feel comfortable speaking up and saying, this is how I think we should try doing this task. One of the things that we do in our practice, we have a program that develops assistants and front office team members and hygienists. And it helps them develop beyond just their initial onboarding process. They develop skills as they go through a ranked system. And by the time they get to the final one, then they have the responsibility to come up with a project of changing something in the office, something that they think is going to be a better way of doing things, or finding a way to implement their boots on the ground mindset to changing something that is an entrenched system of the way that we've done things in the past. The idea for this came from Boy Scouts. Back in the day, I did my Eagle Scout project, and that Eagle Scout project is after you've learned all of these things, implement them in doing some sort of service project for someone else. And the idea behind the way that we do our final capstone project of training our team is that they come up with a system and they find a way to change it. So we've created an environment where it's important for people to ask themselves, why are we doing this thing the way that we're doing, and can we do it any better? So in summary today, I want to remind everyone that just because things have always been done a certain way does not mean that is the way that they should be done. In fact, most often I would say if there's a way that things have always been done, that is the type of thing that you need to question and reflect on and see if there is a better way of doing it. Revisit the process and ask, is there a way that we can foster innovation and move this system forward? Is there a better way of doing this? In dentistry, there's a really good example of this that comes from barbers. The dentists, at least in the United States, started off as being barbers. When you would go get your hair cut, that's when you would get a tooth pulled. And so something that we have in dentistry, those little glass jars behind the operatory where you hold gauze and where you hold cotton rolls and where you hold those suction tips, those glass jars, the reason that a lot of dental offices have those, or at least had those, is because they were holdover from barbershops when the barbers would hold their combs in there. And so when dentists branched off and became a division of healthcare, that is where those little glass jars came from, is because they were barbers. And when I started practicing, when I graduated from dental school and I was working in the Army, our office still had those. Our office was, every single operatory was full of glass jars with suction tips and gauze and 2x2s. And we had to ask ourselves, why is this organized like this? Because it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's not very efficient. And we made the change to organize things in a different way that made it much more streamlined, much more efficient, easier to stock. There were so many benefits that came from asking ourselves, why is this done this way? And is there a better way to do it? So just wanted to go ahead and challenge you to think about the things in your practice. Is there anything that you are doing that you don't really understand the why behind it? And if so, can you do it in a better way? Can you stop cutting the legs off of your turkey and bake that turkey whole? Find a different way to do it in a way that makes sense for you and for your practice. And with that, always be leading and always be learning. We'll see you next time. And that's it for this episode of the Leading in Dentistry podcast. If you learned something today, please leave a 5-star review and share the episode with a friend. If you're ready to take the next step for yourself or provide leadership training for a team member, visit leadingindentistry.com to check out our online courses and one-on-one coaching.